What would you do if the world wrote you off as a failure, only to realize too late that you were the genius behind their greatest invention? The sleek conference hall of Whitmore Aerospace pulsed with a tense electricity. 200 of Detroit's sharpest minds engineers, executives, and a scattering of high-profile journalists sat in silent anticipation. Their gazes, sharp as scalpels, locked onto the center of the stage where a single figure stood alone. Amelia Carter, 35 years old, buttoned white shirt from a discount rack, jeans faded from real labor, and sneakers that had seen better years. She looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn into the wrong room, an outsider among sharp suits and starched collars. Yet there she stood, 5 feet from the R7000A $2 million aerospace engine that had stumped Whitmore's top engineers for 3 straight days. Preston Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Aerospace, sauntered onto the stage with theatrical flair. The man was all swagger-tailored grey suit, manicured hair, and a voice trained in boardrooms and televised interviews. He didn't need a microphone, but he used one anyway, letting the echo magnify his disdain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice dripping with mockery, "today we are graced by the presence of a self-taught genius. No degree, no certifications, no reason to be here." He paused for the ripple of laughter. "Miss Carter claims she can do what our best MIT graduates couldn't. Fix this engine. Right here. Right now." He leaned down, picked up a silver wrench from a velvet-lined box, and tossed it at Amelia's feet. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot. 30 minutes. That's all you get. Fail, and you walk away. Forever. Laughter surged through the crowd like a wave. Engineers elbowed one another. Phones discreetly began recording. Amelia bent down slowly, picked up the wrench, and inhaled. Her brown eyes flickered with something the cameras missed: pain, memory, calculation. She knew this game. The humiliation was choreographed. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly suspect, was who she really was. 5 years earlier, Amelia Carter had stood under the spotlight at NASA's Johnson Space Center, accepting honors as the youngest chief engineer in Orion program history. Back then she wore navy blue suits and heels, her hair wrapped in the confidence of achievement. Her propulsion design had slashed fuel costs and expanded efficiency like nothing before it. But that woman had vanished from the headlines overnight. Now, in the polished cruelty of Preston's showcase, Amelia wasn't here for a job. She wasn't even here for vindication. She was here because something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She had seen the R7000 specs, and something about it, the vibration profile, the resonance data, felt chillingly familiar. Familiar enough to pull her out of a quiet life in a Detroit library and drag her into this lion's den. Preston grinned at the audience, soaking up the attention. "It takes courage to dream," he said, "but it takes credentials to build." That earned him an applause line. Amelia said nothing. She stepped closer to the engine, laying her hand gently on its metallic surface. The vibrations, the compression ratio, the inconsistencies. Her eyes narrowed. She had built this before. Or rather, she had built what this engine was trying and failing to imitate. It was her design, altered. Sloppily, dangerously. Somewhere beneath the corporate branding and proprietary casing, the ghost of her original work remained. It was like seeing your signature forged with the wrong curves. She felt nausea rise. And just like that, her mission crystallized. This wasn't just a stunt. This was a cover-up. 10 feet away, Jade Monroe, Whitmore's lead engineer, leaned toward Grant Bishop and whispered loud enough for Amelia to hear, "You think she knows where to find the engine panel? Or should we draw her a map?" More laughter. Amelia didn't flinch. Caleb Whitmore, barely out of grad school and full of inherited arrogance, smirked. Maybe she's praying. "This is engineering, not church." But Amelia's hand was already moving, her injured right hand stiff from nerve damage that no one could see under the sleeve. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began unfastening the casing. Her movements weren't smooth. They were measured, precise. In the crowd, Mr. Howard Greer, a retired aerospace journalist, squinted. Something about the way she moved it was like watching a virtuoso tune an old instrument. The clock ticked. Amelia had less than 28 minutes. She could feel 200 eyes drilling into her spine. But her focus tunneled inward. She saw the problem. It was worse than she feared. Miscalibrated compression. Desynced resonance. At 40,000 feet, this engine would fail catastrophically. Someone had stolen her design and butchered it, but she would not break. Because today, Amelia Carter wasn't here to prove her worth. She was here to stop a disaster. And maybe, just maybe, reclaim her name. Amelia Carter hadn't always been invisible. Just 5 years ago, she stood beneath the spotlight of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, applauded, celebrated, even revered. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, she held the gaze of a packed auditorium. Cameras flashed. The NASA director praised her by name. Dr. Amelia Carter, he had announced, the youngest chief engineer to lead the Orion Propulsion Initiative, a visionary, a pioneer. Her work had revolutionized space travel. Her design had slashed fuel consumption by 40% and boosted efficiency by 60%. Her name, once unknown, had been tied to humanity's next leap toward Mars. But Amelia hadn't looked for cameras that night. She had scanned the crowd for one face, Liam Carter, her fiancé and research partner. He sat front row, beaming, clapping louder than the rest. Together, they were a dream team, two brilliant minds united by science and love. The next day, they were to file a joint patent. The week after, a small wedding with their NASA family. Everything was falling into place. Until that night, she had returned to the lab to grab a personal notebook, her mind still buzzing with post-ceremony adrenaline. But when she opened the door, the lights were on. Liam was there, hunched over her workstation. Her heart skipped. She smiled, but then she saw it. External hard drives, her code, her designs. All of it being copied. Liam, she whispered. He didn't flinch. I'm doing what you should have done months ago, he said, without turning. What are you talking about? He turned around slowly, his face calm, almost bored. Lockheed Martin offered $50 million for this tech. For me. For you, she echoed. This is our work. NASA's work. He laughed, not kindly. Come on, Amelia. You really think the world sees you as the genius here? You were always the assistant, the decoration. The female bonus in every photo op. The words hit like cold metal. They had spent 5 years working side by side. They shared dreams, pizza at midnight, failure and euphoria. But somewhere along the way, he had rewritten the story, positioned himself as the genius and her as the support. She tried to stop him, to reach for the drives. He triggered the alarm first. Within minutes, security swarmed. Liam pointed at her. She's stealing classified data, he said. That night changed everything. The explosion came 2 days later. He had sabotaged the lab to destroy traces of the transfer. The blast wasn't fatal, but Amelia's right hand, her dominant hand, suffered severe nerve damage. The one she used to sketch designs, to turn dreams into diagrams. 6 months of investigation followed, but Liam had planted every seed, carefully doctored emails, manipulated surveillance footage, even paid off colleagues to testify against her. NASA let her go quietly, not wanting scandal. Her name was never officially cleared. Her achievements buried. Liam Carter moved on, hailed as the rising star of aerospace innovation. And Amelia Carter, she vanished. She didn't fight back. Not in the way people expected. She didn't hire high-profile attorneys, didn't hold press conferences. She packed a suitcase, boxed up her doctorate and NASA plaques, and moved into a modest apartment on Detroit's east side. Every morning at 5 a.m., she brewed black coffee in a chipped mug. Then she'd sit by the window and watch the smokestacks hum. To her neighbors, she was just the quiet woman from the library. No one knew she had once designed engines that could take humans to Mars. She wore the same worn sneakers, kept her hair tied back in a ponytail, didn't wear makeup, never talked about the past. Mrs. Ruth Langston, her elderly neighbor, often told others, "She's so kind, helps my grandson with science homework, but there's something heavy behind her smile." They didn't know what she carried. Amelia had applied for the entry-level technician job at Whitmore Aerospace because something had stirred inside her. An article, a blurry image, a leaked diagram, the RS-7000 engine. There was something off in the compression sequence, something painfully familiar. She hadn't applied to prove herself. She had applied because she feared what she was seeing. When she met with Grant Bishop and Jade Monroe, they looked at her resume and scoffed. "You fixed cars in garages? Why are you applying for an aerospace technician job in your mid-30s? Amelia had simply replied, "Sometimes passion matters more than paper." They let her take the practical test. She completed it in half the time. She identified issues their senior engineers had missed for weeks. That's when the whispers started. The woman with no degree, the woman who knew too much, the woman who made the engine purr. It didn't take long for the rumors to reach Preston Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Aerospace, a man raised in legacy and self-entitlement. His father had built the company. Preston inherited the crown. His engineers were Ivy League, his ego untouchable. Preston couldn't believe someone like her, with no credentials, no pedigree, could outperform his prized team. So, he arranged a demonstration. A trap. He invited Amelia under the guise of an advanced interview, but what he really wanted was to humiliate her. He gathered a crowd, called the press, planted his favorite engineers at the front row, and handed her a wrench. The same kind of wrench NASA had gifted her when she launched Orion's core. Only this time it was meant as a joke. But Amelia Carter didn't flinch. She didn't lash out. She picked up the wrench, and something awakened in her. She wasn't here to reclaim her title. She was here to prevent a deadly mistake, and perhaps to find closure. The moment Amelia's fingers touched the R-7000's outer shell, it all came flooding back. The long nights at NASA's propulsion lab, the constant hum of compressors and turbines, the smell of solder, oil, and burnt plastic. But most of all, the sound, the whisper of a machine speaking to its maker. She hadn't heard that in 5 years. Around her, the auditorium buzzed with cynicism. Caleb Whitmore leaned over to a colleague and muttered, "Maybe she thinks the engine will fix itself if she hugs it." Laughter rippled again, sharp and mean, but Amelia wasn't listening. She'd already peeled back the first panel, her eyes scanning the complex weave of lines, valves, and circuits. Her right hand trembled slightly from the lingering nerve damage. Each precise movement was hard-won, but she didn't hesitate. She was diagnosing, not with guesswork, but with instinct sharpened by years of intimate design. She recognized the flaw instantly. It wasn't just that the R-7000 was unstable. It was dangerous. A misaligned pressure regulation valve, a mismatched resonance frequency. The whole system would fail at cruising altitude, disintegrate mid-air. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a theft. Someone had taken her original Orion propulsion model and tampered with it badly. She remembered the equations, the delicate fuel-air ratios, the vibration control tolerances. This version was a Frankensteiner, flashy, shallow imitation of what she'd once created. It could kill people. Suddenly the jeers faded into the background. Her mission was clear. She had to fix it, not for fame, not even for justice, but for the people who would eventually sit in the aircraft powered by this engine. Preston Whitmore strutted across the stage again, soaking in the room's cruel enthusiasm. 20 minutes left, he announced, like a game show host. She still hasn't removed the intake regulator, Jade Monroe smirked from the front row. Maybe she thinks it's decorative. Even Grant Bishop, veteran of 24 successful engine launches, chuckled. You'd think she'd know which end is up if she was serious. But Amelia didn't flinch. She was past caring what they thought. In her mind, she was back in the NASA lab with her old team. She could still hear their voices. The laughter after solving a propulsion paradox, the heated debates about thermal stability, the whispered dreams of reaching Mars. They had believed in her, and she had believed in them until Liam Carter betrayed her trust and burned the future they had built. But even in her darkest days, she hadn't stopped learning. She rebuilt old carburetors in her Detroit apartment just to keep her fingers nimble. She watched propulsion breakthroughs from afar. She taught kids how to build mini-rockets with baking soda and vinegar, smiling even when the ache in her hand pulsed with every motion. This wasn't a comeback. This was a reckoning. 15 minutes, Preston barked. She's going to cry, someone whispered. The cameras were still rolling. Every reporter in the room was ready to write the same headline. Unqualified woman fails spectacularly in front of experts. But then Amelia spoke softly, calmly. I need a digital micromodder and a fluke precision calibration kit. The room froze. Even Grant blinked. No one outside high-level propulsion design used those tools. Preston raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Amelia stood straight, voice firm now. Unless you want this engine to explode at 40,000 feet, I suggest you bring me what I asked for. Now. Jade narrowed her eyes. How would you even know the failure point? Amelia didn't answer. She was already recalibrating the pressure valves with her wrench. Her hands moved faster now. Confidence surged like a current through her limbs. When the tools arrived, she worked in silence. Gasps echoed through the room as she disassembled the regulation chamber in under a minute. Her hands were fluid, precise, as if she were dancing with the machine. It wasn't performance. It was mastery. She pointed to a flaw so small, most engineers would have missed it. This frequency mismatch here, she explained, will generate harmonic vibrations. Combine that with the incorrect compression ratio 15.2 instead of 14.7, and the engine will experience total structural failure mid-flight. Dead silence. The kind of silence that comes before a fall. Jade Monroe stepped forward, her voice cracking. That's about impossible. Those specs are classified. Amelia didn't look up. Not to me. I designed them 5 years ago. For NASA. This is a corrupted version of the Orion engine. Grant Bishop's face drained of color. Preston, suddenly pale, stepped back from the podium. You're lying, someone whispered. But then Amelia pulled something from her back pocket, a small pin. The NASA insignia. Worn down by years of being hidden, but still shining under the light. She placed it gently on the panel and looked up. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to prevent a tragedy. The test sequence lit up green. The R7000 roared to life, not with instability, but with balance. Harmony. Precision. Every screen showed optimal performance. For the first time in that room, no one said a word. No more laughter, no more mockery, just realization. Amelia Carter had just done what 200 experts couldn't. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't needed their approval. She had simply shown up, told the truth, and done the work, the same way she always had. The auditorium was no longer buzzing. It was holding its breath. The once mocking crowd now stood silent as the test screen blinked green, every metric in the safe zone, every diagnostic bar glowing perfect. Amelia Carter stepped back from the engine, her fingers tingling with the aftershock of focus. Her damaged right hand throbbed from the intensity, but she didn't wince. Not this time. The pain had become part of her strength. Preston Whitmore looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His prized engineering team, Grant Bishop, Jade Monroe, and a half-dozen MIT elites stood frozen. Some in awe, some in disbelief, a few in shame. The young intern, Caleb, who had called her a YouTube mechanic, couldn't even meet her eyes. Amelia calmly removed her work gloves. She glanced at the engine once more, as if saying goodbye to something she once loved. Then, she turned to face the room. "I'm the one who designed the original Orion engine," she said. "I know this because I remember every weld, every algorithm, every sleepless night that went into it." Jade Monroe's voice trembled. "You can't be." "Dr. Mitchell she's dead?" Amelia finished for her. "Disgraced? Forgotten." She stepped forward and rolled up the sleeve of her button-down shirt. Scars deep, pale, and jagged ran across her forearm. The legacy of the lab explosion. The legacy of Liam Carter. "This is what was left of me when the man I trusted burned down our lab and framed me for stealing my own work." A reporter in the back dropped her pen. Another raised her phone again, not to mock this time, but to capture history being rewritten. Mr. Howard Greer, the elderly journalist in the third row, stood slowly. His hands trembled as he held up his notepad, pages filled with scribbled words. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Amelia Carter, the youngest propulsion lead in NASA history. The woman who was supposed to take us to Mars. I remember your face. I wrote your story. And then it all vanished." "I vanished," Amelia said. "Because when you're a woman in aerospace, especially one without the right last name or Ivy League badge, people don't look too hard for the truth once it's buried." She paused. The silence hung, heavy and unflinching. "But I didn't come here for justice," she continued. "I came because I saw my design broken, misused, dangerous. I couldn't let innocent people die because someone corrupted what I built." Preston finally spoke, though it came out as a rasp. You're threatening us with a lawsuit." Amelia held up her phone. On its screen was a file, legal documentation, unmistakable and recent. "This is a cease and desist order prepared by my legal team. It outlines Sterling Aerospace's unauthorized use of my patented design. The damages total approximately $500 million. The room gasped. Preston staggered back into his chair, face drained of blood. "But I'm not filing it," she said. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Jade Monroe took a step forward. Why wouldn't you?" Amelia turned, her gaze calm and clear. "Because I didn't come here to sue. I came to fix what was broken." She looked at each face in the room. "You were all so ready to laugh, so ready to see me fail. But I wasn't here to prove you wrong. I was here to make sure you didn't build a weapon disguised as progress." Sarah Chen's voice cracked as she stepped forward. "I'm so sorry." The apology was real. Tears glimmered at the edges of her eyes. "What we did, what I said, it was cruel. I judged you without knowing anything. I let my fear of being shown up turn into mockery." Amelia gave a small nod. "Sorry doesn't undo harm," she said gently, "but it can begin something better." Grant Bishop removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes as if trying to erase the scene and start over. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "please stay. Join our team. We'll give you full authority. Any title, any compensation, we need you." Amelia looked at him with compassion, not contempt. "What you need," she said, "is to change your culture. You don't need me to validate your team. You need to stop locking the door to people who don't fit your mold." She gestured to the engine behind her. "That machine doesn't care what school you went to. Neither should you." Preston stood slowly, like a man walking toward his own reckoning. "I'll restore your name," he said. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. You can start, Amelia replied, by opening the door for the next girl in a garage who dreams of building engines, the one no one sees yet. The room stayed still. Even the camera crews were quiet. This wasn't a comeback, it was a correction. And Amelia Carter wasn't asking for permission anymore. Outside, the sky over Detroit had softened into a pale afternoon glow. Reporters tried to follow her out. Engineers called after her name. But Amelia kept walking her steps steady, her back straight, her silence more powerful than 1,000 mic drops. At the door, she turned once more. "I'm going back to the library," she said, "where little girls come to learn science, and no one tells them they're not enough." Then she was gone, walking out of the building that tried to humiliate her and leaving behind a room full of people who now had to face who they really were. The conference doors shut behind her, but Amelia Carter didn't look back. She didn't need to. What she left behind was not just an auditorium of stunned engineers, it was a battlefield, and she had walked away victorious. Not because she crushed her enemies, but because she had chosen something harder: grace. Outside, the Detroit air was brisk, laced with exhaust and the tang of early autumn. She pulled her canvas tote higher on her shoulder. Inside were her gloves, a copy of Hidden Figures, and a worn envelope she had never opened. The letter NASA sent after her dismissal. She had carried it for years, but never read it. She didn't need to. The truth had never lived on paper. It had lived in her hands, her work, and now in the memory of everyone who had watched her rebuild a corrupted engine in 27 minutes flat. Back at the East Side Library, a little girl named Keisha waited by the front desk. Her pink backpack was unzipped, a binder full of drawings sticking out. "Is Miss Amelia coming today?" she asked the security guard. "She better," the man chuckled. "Somebody has to explain this math homework to me." At 3:30 p.m. sharp, Amelia walked in, hair pulled back, wearing the same white shirt and sneakers. A few news vans were parked outside, but she ignored them. She had made her statement. She didn't owe the world a press conference. "Miss Amelia!" Keisha ran up and hugged her. "Hey, rocket scientist," Amelia smiled. "You finished that model I gave you?" Keisha nodded and pulled out a homemade paper rocket covered in glitter. "But it keeps falling sideways." "Good," Amelia said. "That means we've got a problem to solve." For the rest of the afternoon, she sat with the kids, taught them how to use geometry to fix balance, used science experiments with vinegar and balloons, told them about thrust, drag and lift without ever mentioning NASA or aerospace or the time she was almost sent to prison. And as she helped a sixth grader spell centrifugal, she realized something. She didn't need the validation of those who had discarded her. Because here where small hands reached for the stars with glue-stained fingers, she mattered in a way that didn't require degrees or patents. That night, Amelia sat at her kitchen table sipping tea. The TV was off. She didn't want to hear talking heads debating whether her story was real or PR spin. The engine diagnostics she had fixed had already been verified by Sterling Aerospace's servers. But the public, she knew, was slower to believe when the truth wore a woman's face. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of missed calls. NASA. The Smithsonian. 3 major news anchors. Even Lockheed Martin, ironically, had emailed an opportunity to consult. She smiled. She had no intention of going back to that world. Her truth had already spoken louder than any title they could now offer. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A hand-delivered letter arrived at the library, addressed simply, "To the woman who fixed what 200 couldn't." Inside was a check for 1 million anonymous, no explanation. Amelia turned it over. On the back, one line was written in blocky handwriting, "For Keisha, so she never has to fix what you had to survive." She folded the check and tucked it away. Not because she needed the money, but because one day, Keisha might. Later that week, the Detroit Free Press published a full-page profile, "The Engineer Who Walked Away." The article didn't focus on drama, it focused on dignity, on how one woman dismantled arrogance not with revenge, but with restraint. One quote from the story stood out. "Sometimes power isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who stays silent and still wins." People across the country began writing letters to the library. Children sent drawings, women in STEM shared their own stories, mechanics, teachers, veterans, people from all walks of life said the same thing: "You reminded me of my worth." Meanwhile, inside Sterling Aerospace, changes began happening. Preston Whitmore stepped down for health reasons. Grant Bishop removed his MIT diploma from the wall and began mentoring entry-level engineers who didn't look like him. Jade Monroe started a program called Open Circuit, bringing high school girls into the lab every Saturday to learn engineering from scratch. None of them contacted Amelia. She didn't expect them to. Forgiveness wasn't a transaction, it was a path, and they had to walk it without her. One evening, as the sun dipped behind Detroit's skyline, Amelia stood on the library rooftop. She looked out over the factories, the narrow streets, the graffiti-covered overpasses. This city had been her hiding place. But now, it was her launch pad. She pulled out the old envelope, the one NASA had sent her 5 years ago. Finally, she opened it.
Inside was a short letter. "We regret the outcome. We wish you well in future endeavors." She smiled.
She tore the letter in half and watched the wind carry it away. Because Amelia Carter wasn't defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she refused to surrender, her integrity, and that was something no betrayal could erase. 3 weeks later, Amelia Carter walked into a different kind of room. It wasn't a lab or a courtroom or a press hall. It was the Community Science Center in East Detroit, just a few blocks from the library where peeling paint met hand-built telescopes and kids asked questions that MIT professors forgot how to ask. She had been invited to speak, reluctantly at first. But when Keisha looked up from her coloring book and said, "Will you tell them how you made Firefly?" Amelia smiled and said yes. The auditorium was small. Folding chairs, homemade banners, no press, no performance. Just parents, kids, teachers, and dreams that hadn't yet been crushed by rejection letters or "you're not the right fit" interviews. She didn't prepare a slide deck, didn't wear a suit. She walked onto the stage in a faded NASA hoodie and told them the truth. "I used to believe that being brilliant was enough," she began. "That if you worked hard, studied hard, showed up early and left late, people would see you. Respect you." She looked out at the crowd. Some parents nodded, weary and knowing. "But I learned that's not how the world always works. Especially if you're not who the world expects genius to look like." There was no bitterness in her voice, only calm. "I lost everything once. Not because I failed, but because I trusted someone who couldn't stand that I didn't need him to shine." She told them about betrayal without naming Liam, about the lab fire without naming Lockheed, about designing the Orion engine and being erased from its story. But she also told them about the day she rebuilt it, with trembling hands, in front of hundreds who thought she didn't belong. "And I didn't do it for them," she said. "I did it for the little girl who still lives inside me. The one who believed she could build something that might touch the stars." After her talk, a boy no older than 10 approached her. He was nervous, holding a toy drone missing a rotor blade. "Do you think I'm too young to be an engineer?" Amelia knelt down. "No," she said. "I think the world's too old to remember how much kids like you matter." She pulled a small toolkit from her bag and sat with him on the floor, fixing it together. That image, Amelia in a hoodie, surrounded by children, eyes lit with hope, would go viral a week later. But she didn't pose for it. She didn't even know someone had taken the picture. The day after her talk, Amelia received an unexpected visitor. A silver sedan pulled up outside the library. The driver stepped out first, a young assistant with an expensive clipboard and even more expensive shoes. Then Vivian Westwood, the deputy director of NASA's public affairs, stepped onto the sidewalk. She wasn't alone. Behind her, Dr. Mason Hollis, a legendary aerospace scientist and former program lead on the Mars Terraforming Initiative. He had mentored Amelia once, briefly, before politics tore their team apart. Now, his white beard and kind eyes greeted her with something she hadn't seen in years, professional respect without conditions. "Amelia," Vivian began, "we owe you an apology." "A real one." Amelia looked at her quietly. No anger, just silence that asked, "And what are you prepared to do about it?" Dr. Hollis stepped in. "I know we can't undo what was taken, but I'd like to offer you something different, a role that isn't about headlines or tokenism." He handed her a simple folder. Inside was a project proposal. The Artemis Youth Initiative, a NASA-funded program to bring advanced aerospace education into underserved communities led not by policymakers, but by people like Amelia Carter, people who had lived the imbalance, survived the exclusion. "This wouldn't be a desk job," Hollis said. "You'd be in charge. Curriculum, mentorship, outreach. You'd shape the whole thing." Amelia looked down at the paper. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't redemption. It was legacy. She didn't answer that day. She needed time. She needed to stand under her favorite tree in the neighborhood park and watch the leaves shift gold, to sip coffee from her chipped mug and remember the sound of gears clicking in a Houston lab long ago. She thought of Liam Carter not with hatred, but as a cautionary tale. The kind of man who thought brilliance meant domination. She wouldn't build anything that resembled him again, not even out of well-meaning ambition. A week later, Amelia stood in front of a new building. The Carter Center for Youth Engineering, a temporary space donated by the City Council after dozens of requests from local parents. Inside, kids built model rockets and coded simulations of Martian landers on second-hand laptops. And in the center of it all stood Amelia. Not in a lab coat, not in a press suit, but in worn jeans and grease-stained gloves. Teaching, showing, believing. Because she had learned something they never taught at MIT. You don't have to stay in the rooms that tried to destroy you to prove that you belong. You can build better rooms and invite others in. 6 months later, the room was humming with electricity, not from machines, but from ideas. Amelia Carter stood at the back of the Carter Center's makeshift auditorium, watching 50 teenagers argue about turbine blade angles with the intensity of Wall Street traders. The walls were covered in whiteboards, filled with equations. The floor was scattered with 3D printed parts, and in the middle of it all, a girl in a wheelchair named Leah Torres held a soldering iron in one hand and a vision in the other. "We're not building a drone," she declared. "We're building an atmospheric scout, Mars-compatible." The group nodded. They weren't there for extra credit or summer boredom. They were there because Amelia Carter had made them believe they could build things that mattered. NASA had made the partnership official. The Artemis Youth Initiative now operated in 5 cities. But Detroit was its heart, because Amelia refused to let bureaucracy slow them down. She still drove a 2006 sedan with a cracked windshield, still taught part-time at the library on Thursdays, and every Saturday she opened the Carter Center at 7 a.m. sharp because some dreams can't wait until 9. One morning, as she was unlocking the front door, she found a small envelope taped to the handle. No address. Just her name written in blocky letters. "To Ms. Carter from someone who saw you before the world did." Inside was a photo. It showed Amelia standing under the broken shell of an old lab years ago, hair pulled back, grease on her hands, mid-laugh. It was a candid shot bone she had never seen. On the back, written in fading pen, "You were always going to outrun the fire." Her fingers trembled. She knew that handwriting. Liam Carter. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. After everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the erasure, why would he send this? But taped to the bottom was a second note, typed. More formal. "I'm dying, Amelia.
Pancreatic cancer.
Stage 4. I have no legacy to leave behind, no work that was truly mine, only the truth I took from you. If you're reading this, it's because I want to give it back. Enclosed was a USB drive. She stared at it for a long time, then put it in her bag and walked inside. That night, she opened the files. Inside were original audio logs from the NASA days files she hadn't heard since before the incident. They captured everything. Late-night strategy calls, her voice explaining propulsion calculations, her laughter echoing in the lab. And then, a final file, a full video confession. Liam, gaunt and pale, sat facing the camera. I stole it all, and then I burned the lab to destroy the evidence. But the biggest fire wasn't in the lab, Amelia. It was in you, and I couldn't stand it, so I tried to extinguish it. He paused. But you lit up again. And this time, it wasn't for NASA. It was for kids who look nothing like me and believe in everything I forgot. Amelia never responded. Not because she didn't forgive, but because she no longer needed closure to keep moving forward. A week later, she stood before a crowd of city leaders and educators. The Carter Center had just received a grant to expand statewide, and reporters asked the usual questions. What inspired you? How did you find the strength? But one elderly man stood up near the back, no press badge. No notepad, just a worn flannel shirt and eyes that had seen hard years. Ma'am, he said, what do we tell our daughters who are brilliant but scared? Amelia looked straight at him, and then at the young girls sitting in the crowd. You tell them brilliance and fear often come in the same package, she said. But courage doesn't mean being fearless. It means building something anyway. After the applause, a young woman approached her with a sketchbook full of engine parts. Mrs. Carter, she whispered, do you think someone like me could design spacecraft someday? Amelia took the book, flipped through the pages, then smiled. No, I think someone like you already has. That night, as she closed up the center, the same old mug of black coffee in hand, she finally opened her email inbox. Among the hundreds of unread messages was one flagged urgent. Subject line, invitation to speak MIT Women in Engineering Centennial. Amelia stared at it. The very institution that once watched her be erased now wanted her as keynote speaker. She didn't feel angry, she didn't feel vindicated, she felt peaceful. She replied, thank you for the invitation. I'm honored, but if it's all the same to you, I'll be sending 10 of my students instead. You won't regret it. They're the future. I was just the storm before the clearing. Because in the end, Amelia Carter didn't just survive the fire. She became the spark. The Detroit Science Expo was never meant to be glamorous. It was held every spring in the basement of a retired YMCA. No red carpets, just long folding tables, creaky overhead lights, and enough duct tape to qualify as a building material. But this year, Amelia Carter showed up, and the city knew something had changed. She didn't come with cameras or handlers. She came with 10 students from the Carter Center, each wearing custom jumpsuits stitched with their names and the words, Built to Imagine. Taught by Carter. Their project? A working prototype of a low-orbit atmospheric sampler constructed from repurposed hardware, garage sale drones, and $93 in grant leftovers. When the judges asked for the source code, Amelia smiled and handed over a thick binder. Printed, so no one edits it without permission. The room laughed, but the smile didn't leave her face. Because she had learned when people laugh with you, they stop laughing at you. Among the judges that day was Dr. Helena Rhodes, head of propulsion research at Lockheed Martin. When she saw the design specs, she looked up sharply. This model, it's derivative of a known Orion framework. Amelia nodded. Yes, but it's improved. Helena frowned.
Do you have IP permission? Amelia didn't blink. I'm the original author. Gasps rippled down the panel.
A murmur of recognition. One of the younger judges whispered, "Wait, that's her, the Amelia Carter. The old rumors, the disappeared NASA engineer, the woman who fixed the RS-7000 engine live on stage. The myth was real." And standing in front of them in a denim jacket. After the presentation, Dr. Rhodes pulled Amelia aside. "I was part of the committee that blacklisted your credentials 5 years ago," she said softly. "We believed Daniel's report. We helped bury you." Amelia didn't respond right away. She looked over her shoulder at her students, now laughing over pizza, proud of what they'd built. Then she said, "You buried me in concrete, but you forgot I was a seed." That night, the Carter Center received an anonymous $2 million donation. The only note enclosed read, "This is your design. Build it the way it should have been." Amelia used the money to start Project Artemis Home, an aerospace incubation hub for girls from foster care and group homes. Because she understood that talent and trauma often grew from the same soil, and no child should have to prove their worth before being handed a toolkit. Meanwhile, a documentary filmmaker named Ezra Collins began work on a film called The Engine She Built, The Quiet Revolution of Amelia Carter. It would go on to win 3 major awards, not because it was flashy, but because it told the truth. Not just about betrayal and sabotage, but about what a woman can become when she stops asking for permission. Months later, Amelia received a letter from the Department of Education. They wanted her input on national STEM curriculum redesign. She said she'd think about it, then added in handwriting, "Only if it starts with a screwdriver and not a scantron." One rainy afternoon, she walked into the Carter Center and found Leah Torres, the same girl who had once declared Mars compatible, now instructing a new batch of students. Leah was 16, commanding, precise, joyful. The very things Amelia once was before the fire. She sat in the back and let Leah teach, because there's a special kind of peace in watching someone else carry the torch, especially when you know you lit it. Later, Leah came up to her. "Mr. Carter," she said, "when people ask what made you keep going after everything, what should I say?" Amelia thought for a long moment, then answered, "Tell them I stopped trying to be accepted by rooms that couldn't see me and started building rooms that never forgot me." Because the story of Amelia Carter isn't about a fall from grace or a comeback story. It's about reinvention, about rising not to reclaim the spotlight, but to redefine what it shines on. It had been 3 years since Amelia Carter last heard the name Daniel Walsh spoken aloud. But when the email came, subject line, ethics review, panel testimony, request, Lockheed internal investigations, he felt her lungs tighten as if someone had stolen the air from the room. Daniel was finally under formal investigation. An anonymous whistleblower inside Lockheed had provided evidence of his role in falsifying research, manipulating internal records, and most damning his theft of the Orion engine. All fingers now pointed back to that night at NASA. The night Amelia lost everything. The Ethics Review Committee wanted her to testify, to appear via live feed, to face Daniel Walsh on camera and tell the truth she had held for too long. She didn't answer right away. Instead, Amelia walked to the park bench where she always went when life asked her impossible questions. The wind was cold that day, and the coffee in her hand had long gone lukewarm. A child across the street rode past on a homemade solar-powered go-kart Carter Center project, and she smiled. She was no longer a woman waiting to be believed. She was the one building belief in others. Still, the thought of seeing Daniel again made her stomach twist. 3 days later, she stood before a simple webcam in a private conference room donated by the Detroit mayor's office. The hearing was closed door, no press. Only the committee and Daniel Walsh. She saw his face on the screen older, thinner, a touch of grey at the temples. But the smirk, it hadn't changed. "Dr. Carter," he greeted, voice smooth as always. "I wasn't expecting you to show." Amelia didn't flinch. "I stopped hiding a long time ago." The panel chairwoman asked her to begin her statement. Amelia inhaled and began not with the betrayal, but with the dream. She talked about the 8-year-old girl watching rockets rise from Cape Canaveral, whispering, "One day, I'll build what makes them fly." She talked about the nights in the lab where collaboration felt like magic before she learned how easily love could be weaponized. She detailed the schematics Daniel stole. The sabotage, the fire, the scars. "Both physical and unseen," Daniel interrupted. "You never could see the bigger picture." "You had the talent, sure, but the politics, the business side." "You didn't understand the game." Amelia looked at him and smiled softly. "I wasn't playing a game. I was building engines to take us to Mars." The chairwoman banged the gavel. "Mr. Walsh, please let Dr. Carter finish." Amelia did. With clarity, with dignity, with unshakable calm. And when she was done, the room was silent, because there are some truths that don't need to be shouted to be heard. After the hearing, she stepped outside into the sunlight and felt a weight lift she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Daniel's career would unravel in the coming months. He would lose his security clearance, his consulting contracts, and eventually his freedom. But Amelia didn't follow the news. She had no interest in revenge, because she had rebuilt her life out of something Daniel could never touch: purpose. That evening, she returned to the Carter Center. The students had prepared a surprise: a mosaic wall made of tiny steel plates, each engraved with the name of a young woman who had gone through the program. At the center was Amelia's name, but not as Dr. Carter, not as engineer. Simply, she believed in us. Amelia stared at it, tears threatening. Not because she was honored, but because she finally understood something she hadn't allowed herself to believe. She had won. Not in court, not in headlines, but in every girl who now walked into a lab without fear. Later that night, she sat with her journal, the one she never let anyone see. She wrote, "I was erased once, but I rewrote myself line by line, hand by hand, and now I am read in every spark that ignites a child's dream." The next day, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, her old NASA badge, burned at the edges. Melted slightly along the back. She hadn't seen it since the fire. Tucked beneath it was a note in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Found in the debris storage of Johnson Space Center. Some things refused to be lost. She held the badge in her hand for a long time, and then, for the first time in 5 years, she wore it around her neck. Not to reclaim the past, but to show her students that no fire, literal or metaphorical, can burn away who you truly are, not when you've built your future from steel. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the invitation arrived. White envelope, thick paper, embossed in gold. At the top, NASA Honors Committee, Annual Legacy Award Ceremony. Amelia Carter stared at it for a long moment before setting it down next to her black coffee. She didn't need awards. Not anymore. But the letter was different. It wasn't addressed to Dr. Carter, or even Ms. Carter. It simply read, "To the woman who lit the sky for others." The ceremony was to be held at the Johnson Space Center, the same place where it all ended, and now where it would come full circle. For a week, Amelia debated whether to go. Her students told her to accept. Her team at the Carter Center offered to fly with her. But in the end, she chose to go alone, not for closure, but to show that she could walk back into the fire and come out whole. On the day of the event, Amelia wore the simplest outfit she owned: white shirt, black slacks. No jewelry, only her old NASA badge around her neck, worn, warped, and unbroken. When she stepped into the auditorium, conversations hushed. Heads turned, and no one knew whether to applaud or bow their heads. She passed by framed photos of men who once denied her existence, past mission flags bearing the name Orion, and into the spotlight uninvited by fear, but fully claimed by history. The host began reading her citation. Amelia Carter's contributions to aerospace engineering saved lives, sparked global STEM education reform, and reminded us that resilience is not loud, it's lasting. When she was asked to speak, she hesitated, then walked to the podium with her hands folded. Not trembling, not seeking justice, just holding space for every woman who had ever been erased. I used to think legacy was about your name on buildings, she began, about titles, patents, awards. She paused. But now I know legacy is what remains when your name is forgotten, but your work keeps others dreaming. She looked out at the room. Some familiar faces, some ghosts, and dozens of young engineers who had grown up hearing rumors of the woman who fixed the engine. She spoke directly to them. If you ever find yourself dismissed, underestimated, overlooked, remember this: you don't need permission to matter. She ended with a quiet line that struck harder than applause. I was once called window dressing. Now I build the rooms. That night she didn't attend the banquet. Instead, she walked alone to the lab where she and Daniel once dreamed. The walls had been painted over, the equipment replaced, but in a far corner, etched into metal, she found it. Carter, Walsh Propulsion Bench, 2019. She took out a small wrench from her pocket and unscrewed the metal tag. No anger, no bitterness, only peace. Then, gently, she left behind a new tag crafted by her students. This bench repaired the future, Carter Center class of 26. Weeks later, back in Detroit, the Carter Center unveiled its Space for All lab, the first publicly funded aerospace lab run entirely by women and students of color. The ribbon was cut not by a politician, not by a CEO, but by Leah Torresno, 18, accepted into Caltech. She turned to Amelia. You built all this from ruins, Amelia smiled. No, I planted a garden. You all decided to grow. One journalist asked her, will you ever go back to NASA? She shook her head. I already made it to Mars. It just looked a little different. In her office hung only one framed item, a crayon drawing from a 6-year-old girl who wrote, I want to fly things. Like you. It was signed only, Amaya, age 6. That was all the recognition Amelia Carter ever needed. Not to be remembered, but to make remembering possible. And if one day a rocket does land on Mars with a propulsion system carrying echoes of her mind, and if, somewhere in its mission logs, there's a quiet line reading, algorithm design based on open source principles published by A. Carter, Detroit, 2027. Then maybe, just maybe, that will be enough. Because in the end, Amelia didn't just build engines, she built belief. And that can't be stolen, can't be erased, and never needs to be explained. In a world that often mistakes degrees for intelligence and prestige for character, Amelia Carter's story reminds us of a deeper truth. Real worth is proven not by credentials, but by resilience, integrity, and quiet excellence. She was betrayed, erased, and cast aside, yet chose not to seek revenge, but instead to rebuild, teach, and serve. That kind of strength doesn't come from titles. It comes from choosing dignity when humiliation would be easier. It comes from fixing what others broke, even when no one says thank you. For older viewers who faced being overlooked because of age, status, or circumstance, this story is a powerful reflection. You are never too old to stand for what's right. You don't need applause to make impact. Sometimes, the most enduring legacy is the life you lead when no one's watching, Whether you're raising grandchildren, mentoring young people, or simply holding fast to your values in a noisy world, remember this. True greatness often walks quietly, but leaves footprints that never fade.